Good evening, X Winterview is back again with another brief dialogue for his dear friend, Annastacey. Driving home from work, as usual. Recording in the car, as usual. Apologies for the audio quality, as usual. This brief dialogue is on how we get fooled by knowledge, how thinking fools us. Where to start? I'm going to start somewhere different. Usually I make a bit of a speech about the imagined self at the centre. But for this speech I'm going to start in Western thought. Why not? The way we think in the West. The West, by and large, if I can make a sweeping generalization, why not, is a thought system of linear, material, rationalism, logic, and so forth, based heavily on the idea or precept that we live in a world, and with a sort of positivistic leaning, we think that by using logic and rational thought and applying it to this world, we will figure out what's going on. This is where it gets interesting. So the positivist, who is fairly certain that scientific inquiry or logical inquiry will somehow provide all the answers, is convinced in one sense that they are exploring the world. Like an explorer. What's going on here? And for the most part, that line of thinking about the world works. Because as you believe the world to be, your thinking about it confirms your beliefs about it. And as your beliefs are confirmed, your thinking about it is reinforced as valid in a self-fulfilling prophecy loop, you might say. To choose a simple example, you might have an idea that, let's choose something really easy, something from the natural world. You might have a hypothesis about the tides. There's a good one. You notice the water rises and then you notice it falls. You notice it rises and you notice it falls. And so you start thinking about this. So what does the scientific mind do? The scientific mind looks for cause. What would cause this? What are the mechanisms of change that seem to be influencing the water? And after basically narrowing down what it couldn't be, you end up with a list of what it likely is. The scientific mind strikes out things that it can't, that couldn't possibly account for the movement. So it might look at something in the ocean. Maybe there is something far out in the ocean that is moving, which causes the water to kind of rock backwards and forwards. So we explore the ocean, not there. Then perhaps we think maybe because the planet is spinning, the water just kind of sloshes around. So we look at the Earth spinning and we wonder about that, and we think, no, that's probably not it either. And then perhaps, I'm oversimplifying here of course, we look at the moon and we wonder about the moon. We think, I just wonder, we see a relationship. Perhaps there's a seeming relationship with the movement of the moon and the tide. And then you look at that and perhaps you discover, in the absence of any other explanation, the final explanation is that it's the moon. That the moon is the cause of the tides, of course. But we do something funny in Western thought. We have to tie off our chain of causality neatly, otherwise we get into infinite regress. So an infinite regress, just to refresh or to enlighten you, is we have to stop somewhere, otherwise in the causal chain we have to keep going backwards infinitely. So the moon causes the tides to rise, but what caused the moon to be there? And what caused that to be there? And so forth. That would be a more purist approach to the causal chain. So we just tie it off, we go, that's good enough as a cause and effect. effect link. And then we make predictions. Now that we know it's the moon, we can now make our tide chart. And lo and behold, the tide chart works beautifully. And so it powerfully reinforces the idea that scientific rationalism is a valid way to look at the world. But what is overlooked in the sort of, I guess, naivety you might say, is that it's one way to look at the world. It's not the only way. And although it gives explanations and predictable models, you're still stuck with the lack of an absolute reference point. So all you could say really is, when you take a rational, logical, scientific lens to the world, that's what you end up with, a scientific and rational model of the world. And you can't disentangle the two. It's impossible. You don't know, you can't see outside of the paradigm to see if there's anything else going on. For example, a quantum physicist could come along and stomp on the models of basic linear causality. Yet, the basic model of linear causality still works. Isn't that funny? So, what does it say? It means that as the model of reality, or of science, if you like, changes and evolves, the understanding of the way reality shifts, it just shifts. The idea is obviously that as our models improve or refine, that we are somehow seeing more reality. But that's a hypothesis. That's not necessarily the case. It's just that we have different ways of expressing that reality that we think is there. And perhaps there'll be another model after quantum mechanics or quantum physics that sort of pushes that aside and says, it's actually something else. It's actually angels deciding on where molecules belong, or something crazy. So that's how the models that we use can, I wouldn't say blind, that's perhaps the wrong word. The models represent themselves. Maybe is a better way of putting that. We just see the model everywhere we look. What about a primitive model? A primitive model might flag deities as responsible for things that happen. Primitive ideas, so-called primitive ideas about sea gods causing the tides to rise or fall. If the sea is happy, the tide rises. If the sea is unhappy, it falls. And so the sea is this sort of moody body of water that's happy for a few hours and it's sad, and it's happy and it's sad, much like a person. And maybe that model works perfectly too. Somehow you figure out, the sea's it's quite happy at the moment. It's all the way up. Yeah, I can tell the sea's getting a bit unhappy because the tide's going out. But if I do something nice for the sea, so I start doing something nice, oh look, the tide's coming back in. That model definitely works. And your reality is confirmed once again. So we are blind to that fact fairly frequently. It's something that I come across in mental health very often. When someone's model of the world doesn't quite work, or it's challenged, they can get very upset. And in the setting where I work, where there's quite severe cases of delusional disorders or psychosis, the models that they have in that moment make sense to the individual, even though to the observer it could be a completely, in quotes, crazy model of the world. They're seeing and hearing perceptual phenomenon that no one else is registering, and it's registering in the mind of that individual as fact, and they're responding to it as if it's fact. Yet because it's not a shared stimulus, you could say that no one else is responding to it. The so-called voice in your head that no one else can hear. And they respond to it as if it's a voice that's just spoken to them perhaps, and asked them a question, and they might reply, which in some ways has its own logic. It's a normal behavior when someone asks you a question to reply politely. What makes it abnormal, of course, is that it's It's the voice in their head that most of us aren't replying to out loud, at least. But we couldn't say that they're not dealing with reality. That would be a fallacious, I'd say, assumption. That they're dealing with the reality as it appears to be. So, coming back to the whole Enlightenment ballpark, amusement park. No, what am I trying to say? Enlightenment game. The game of trying to somehow achieve this thing called enlightenment, or see the world as non-dual, or see it as one, or whatever you like, or even just a generic spiritual goal, perhaps. We have a conundrum. We have our starting point as a conundrum, let alone the idea that the individual or the self is non-existent. We're not even certain if our mode of thinking about reality or spirituality is a valid mode. We don't have a reference point. How do we start the spiritual journey without any yardstick of this is the way to think about spirituality? And inevitably we tend to just follow on from the thinking that we use for everything else. So, for example, if you're quite a rational, methodical person, you might end up being very rational and methodical in your approach to spirituality. You'll read all the books, study all the mantras perhaps, see what the best ones are, learn all the sort of wisdom quotes, and apply it. And wait for the results to arise, hoping that you're somehow on the right path. The other way we could apply is primitive thinking. We could be, again, sort of more magical. It's up to God. It's God's grace. It's up to something called grace or energy, or something along that line of thinking. And you're quite willing to throw rational thought out the window. You recognize rational thought won't get me there because God is beyond all that. So you just apply sort of more fantastical style to it, a more sort of devotional, prayer-based thing, that again will seem to hopefully take you there. Hopefully. But again, we're stuck. We don't have a yardstick. We can read books of the same ilk. We could talk to people of the same ilk. We don't know. But when we get these experiences, these spiritual experiences, after we've made some kind of endeavour, we're powerfully reinforced, or the mode of endeavour is powerfully reinforced. So, here's a funny example. You could be studying the scriptures for years. You could be reading all the heavyweights in spirituality, all the ones that thousands of people will flock to see, and you're reading their books, and you're listening to their audio, or their CDs, and all that, going to retreats with them, and nothing's happening. And because you're rational and logical, you're like, okay, let's go through this. I've been doing this for 10 years. I've been listening to da-da-da for 10 years. Not happening. Right, I'm going to change it. I'm going to change my style. What I'm going to do is, I'm just going to forget all that crap, all that guru crap, all these so-called heavyweights. They don't know anything. I'm just going to do it on my own. So you throw your books away, you throw your CDs away, and you set off on a little mini solo quest. You go and check into a retreat somewhere in the wilderness, or you walk up a mountain and sit in a cave, and I'm going to meditate and get this. And then suddenly you have this powerful experience, perhaps this strange shift in perception, or a glimpse of the divine, or however you want to phrase it. And now your mind is in a quandary. It's a total quandary. It's like, well, what caused that? Was it because I was, the 10 years of study that I already did? Or was it because I suddenly struck out on my own and, became independent? There's no way to know. There's just no way. It's awful. But the more likely scenario is that you'll attribute it to your most recent action. Recently I threw away all the books and gurus and I set it on my own. And you might become a little bit of a zealot for that pathway now. Like, tell others, well, what you have to do is throw away all your books and set out on your own. So people might hear that and believe you and try it themselves, and then it doesn't work. They don't get the same results. Or someone could have completely the opposite. For years I was trying on my own, and then I picked up this book by Guru, Baba, whoever from India, read 2 chapters, and then bam, I could see the divine in everything, and that was it. And now I'm a disciple of that guru. His wisdom, or her wisdom, shone the way. So we don't know. If we just go with our thinking, we're stuck. We're totally stuck. We have no inkling of what may have caused any kind of shift or anything like that. We don't even know if that spirituality falls into cause and effect. Even the sort of more fantastical versions of cause and effect of deities and energies and spirits, we don't know if they're in any way responsible. We're stuffed. We're totally trapped. Any thinking around it at all, any mind stuff, is inevitably doomed to that uncertainty. So in one sense, you might as well just keep on doing whatever. It doesn't matter. Keep on reading your big books if you want, or whatever. It's in that sense, because nothing is known and nothing is knowable. There's no harm, really. There's no danger. It's funny, you can't go off track. It's a very common idea that you can deviate from the path, so to speak. And I think that's a common fear, that if I deviate from the path, I'll head down an alleyway, a sideline, so to speak. A lot of teachers will talk about the dangers of straying off the path as if there's a path that can be strayed from, as if it would make a difference. So this was really just I don't know what it was, a little homage to the uncertainty of thought, the we don't know of thought. One of the very strange things about liberation is the unknown. It's totally unknown. It's scary unknown in one sense. Like all the knowledge that you've accumulated over the years, all your thinking around it is gone. And that there can be pangs of, holy crap, I have no idea what's going on. It can be felt like that. And that can be an exciting feeling too. The revelation that nothing needs to be known can be felt as exciting and exhilarating in many ways. So there's an unknown safety in the not knowingness. You could say that as well. There's this very strange sense of being totally safe within the ignorance, if you like, or I prefer unknowingness. Ignorance sounds a bit negative. The unknowingness. And there's this real. I've heard it before that it's called that it's referred to as humility, but I don't like saying it's humility. It's humility because that conjures up images of having to get down on your knees and pray to me somehow. I don't know why I have that image. I don't use the word humility. It's like, it's not just the unknowingness or the not knowingness. It's that it can't be known. It's an inability to form any ideas and concepts about anything, like anything, which is a very funny way to go about your day to day, I can assure you. Sitting in meetings not having a clue about anything. And then what's really funny, to me at least, is that the answer comes out of your mouth when you need it. That's even funnier. Anyway, that's a whole other story. So anyway, I hope that this was in some ways interesting, and hope you're all well, and comments are welcome as usual.